Bob Herbert's OpEd.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. It's been 64 years since the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education ruling outlawing segregation in public schools. This year, Linda Brown, whose father was the lead plaintiff in that landmark case, died at the age of 75. All those years have passed, and yet school segregation on an enormous scale persists, and passions on both sides of the issue remain intense. Is this a problem without a solution? I'll talk about this and other important education issues with my guest, Leonie Haimson, a longtime education activist and the founder and executive director of the advocacy group Class Size Matters. Leonie, welcome. How are you?
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. So, we don't have to look far to confront the issue of school segregation. Right here in liberal New York City, we've got a fair amount of it. Just how segregated are New York City schools? How would you characterize the situation?
Well, several institutes, research analysis have said that New York City has the most segregated public schools in the nation. So the vast majority of our public schools are very segregated, which means either more than 80% of either white and Asian versus Black and Latino. So we have a serious problem here, no doubt. And I'd say most of the large urban districts across the country are extremely segregated as well.
And in New York, and we'll get to the rest of the country as well, but in New York, there's a problem everywhere you look. So white families do better at getting into the better preschools in New York City, but if you go all the way up to the elite high schools, white and Asian students are enrolled at much higher rates than Black and Latino students. So we know that housing patterns and housing discrimination are problems, but it's got to be more than that. What else is driving this intense segregation? So
more than most other districts across the country, New York City schools, especially at the middle school and high school level, admissions are based at least in part on test scores. And our top high schools, our specialized high schools, the entire admissions process is based on one single standardized exam. I think we're the only district in the country where that's true. And whenever you base admissions solely on standardized exams, you're going to have huge issues with racial imbalance and basic unfairness because students do not equal their test scores. And there are many, many other factors that should go into putting together a good school other than test scores. So the fact that we have this test-based system makes the inherent segregation of our city even worse.
And in some cases, we've had school districts where I guess there have been efforts to integrate or desegregate, and parents have resisted. It seems like in some stories I've read, it seems like going back to the 1970s or something. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's really a mixed picture in New York City because I want to give credit to a lot of parents who have led the movement for desegregation.
Which is why you have the clash. There's an effort to desegregate.
Yeah, and most of the effort to desegregating is coming from the grassroots, is coming from parents themselves. For example, in District 1, which is on the Lower East Side, parents have led the fight for desegregated schools now for over 10 years. And only recently has the administration begun to respond to that need and those campaigns by allowing a certain amount of desegregation efforts to occur. So I believe that parents deserve a lot of credit in a lot of parts of the city for leading the movement to desegregating our schools. Now, there are parents in certain parts of the city as well who are very hesitant because they too equate good schools with high test scores, and that they understand that when schools become desegregated, test scores tend to go down. And in my mind, the fault is the overwhelming ideology and corporate reform that New York City and schools across the country have taken since No Child Left Behind in order to equate test scores as achievement. Because once you do that, the schools that tend to have the low test scores, then there's an effort to close them down, to fire the teachers, or to turn them into charter schools. And that is inherently destabilizing. And of course, no parent wants to send their kid to a school like that. And recently there was a blog post by a teacher in Pennsylvania whose school had taken efforts to desegregate on their own, and now they're on a watch list for closure because of it.
Wow.
And so that just shows that the entire direction of this country in terms of education policy has moved in the wrong direction and has worsened segregation, along with the increase in charter schools, which is another huge issue, which we should discuss probably.
Why should we care? Does it make a difference whether schools are integrated or not? Why is this an issue of significance?
So there is some research showing that the achievement gap between racial groups narrows when schools become integrated, and that there's more resources in integrated schools for the students. But I think the larger issue is that as a country, we are so divided racially, economically, and ideologically that it is more important than ever that kids of different backgrounds go to school together, and parents of different backgrounds are involved in those schools. And we learn from each other. We learn empathy, we learn different points of view, and we move together as a country. Really, public schools are one of the last institutions in this country that our democracy is based on. And part of that democracy depends on unification and understanding other people's positions. And with our country so divided and so polarized, I think integration is more important than ever.
You mentioned charter schools, and it seems to me that diversity just about goes out the window when you start to talk about charter schools. So you can have Democrats, very liberal people who are super pro-charter, and if a school is 98 or 100% African American, that's fine with them. What's up with that? Why is the issue of integration such a non-factor when we talk about charter schools?
Well, the studies show that charters tend to be even more segregated than our public schools, which is saying a lot. And what the charter people, the charter lobby argue is that integration doesn't matter, especially if these schools are getting good test scores. But the problem with that is a lot of the higher test scores that some of them get, not all of them by any means, are based upon excluding some of our neediest kids,
right,
especially kids with special needs and English language learners. There is not a district in the country with charter schools where charters enroll an equal number of those students. And so what a lot of them do, including here in New York City, and I have many friends who are parents of former charter school students who this happened to, is that their kids get into the school, and then because of they don't conform either academically or behaviorally to the very strict rules of the charter school,
right,
one by one, they get suspended repeatedly and they get pushed out. And that is no model for a school system that I know of. And because of that, there really has become a tale of two cities in New York City and many other large urban districts in which the charter schools are exempted from a lot of the rules around discipline, suspension, and expulsion. And also there's less financial oversight. So we've seen increasing numbers of scandals. Recently in Ohio, an online charter chain, one of the largest in the country, was found to have basically stolen $1 billion worth of public school funds. And many of these were supported by Republicans who were being paid by the people who ran the charter school. And so in any case, right now in New York City, for example, charter schools are taking more than $1.8 billion out of the public school system, which is already underfunding. But in other cases, in many cases, a lot of that money is going to graft and corruption as well. So we really see an undermining of the public school system. We see an undermining of efforts to integrate and to provide more humane disciplinary processes in schools. and to have a more child-centered education that's less test-based because of the expansion of charter schools.
So let's stay with this for a moment, because I personally, and I've covered this a fair amount, I don't understand the fascination with charter schools. So, and you've touched on some of these points. The overwhelming number of public school students go to traditional public schools. They don't go to charter schools. On the whole, studies have shown, if I have this correct, that charter schools don't do any better than traditional public schools academically. If you take the whole Megillah into account, they don't perform better. They don't have overall better outcomes. Charter schools, as you pointed out, drain a tremendous amount of money and other resources away from traditional public schools. The charter schools are public schools, but they don't have to follow the same rules and regulations as you point out. So a tremendous number of kids are left behind when these resources are drained from the traditional schools. So what is this fascination? Why are so many people so crazy about charter schools?
You know, I can't psychoanalyze this movement, and
I wish you would.
You know, I think a lot of it is based, the main supporters of the charter schools financially are like, especially in New York, are Wall Street and hedge fund managers who believe in the free market. And they have made a lot of money through the so-called free market. And they believe that our school system should be competitive and based on a free market. And instead of profits, test scores should be the proxy. And they also tend to be very anti-union. And they argue, without any evidence, that the unions are the basis of low performance in the large cities, particularly among kids of color. And so they want to destroy the unions. They don't believe that public education should be fully funded. In fact, they argue that money doesn't matter. And one of the ways they prove this is by the charter schools, which, by the way, they're also supporting and giving millions of dollars to. So a lot of their actions are self-contradictory.
Yeah, a lot of the charter schools are lavishly funded.
Yeah, not all of them, but in New York City, we have several charter chains that make millions of dollars on the side, in addition to getting public support. And one of the things that I find most distressing about it is that, you know, my life is devoted to reducing class size in the public schools, which I think is the number one way that you really narrow the achievement gap. And there's a lot of research that shows that, and deliver a full quality education to kids. And yet, most of our schools are overcrowded. More than 500,000 kids are in overcrowded public schools in New York City. And yet now we have a law that was passed at the insistence of the charter lobby that every new and charter school should get space at city expense. And so as our public schools get more and more overcrowded and have larger and larger classes sizes, our charter schools are guaranteed space that we have to pay for, either in our overcrowded public schools or in private space. We have to pay for their leases. Right. So that shows the privileges and the priorities that we're giving to one aspect of our school system over another, and that just is not fair.
So obviously the Trump administration and the Republican Party in general, very much pro-charter and also very big on privatization. They're not exactly the same thing, although there's a great deal of overlap there. Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, recently visited New York City. Talk a little bit about the schools she chose to go to.
So she visited two yeshivas, which are Orthodox Jewish schools in New York City, one for boys and one for girls. And this is a particularly controversial topic in New York City because many of the yeshivas, not the ones she happened to visit, but many of the yeshivas in New York, especially those for boys, do not provide an adequate education to the boys, and in fact they learn no secular subjects after about the age of 12. And so you can come across kids in New York City who can barely speak English because they're attending yeshivas. And the city, this is contrary to state law and city law, in which all kids, even in private schools, are supposed to get a sound basic education. And so the city has been promising now for 3 years to investigate this and has basically done nothing. But beyond that, there is a long tradition And in fact, a part of our state constitution called the Blaine Amendment in our state constitution and other states across the country, which are separate church and state, and which say that the public dollars are not supposed to go directly towards religious education. Betsy DeVos, when she came here, not just visited those two schools, but strongly came out against the Blaine Amendment and said that they should be removed from all state constitutions. She's a very big believer in religious education. She's a fundamentalist Christian. In her home state of Michigan, she has funded many campaigns to try to institute publicly funded vouchers for religious schools that have failed in the ballot box. And yet she's determined to spread this gospel nationwide.
Right.
And so it's very dangerous, because that's another division, that's another basic, I think, bedrock principle of our democracy, is that our schools should be secular as much as possible.
So your organization is, what you founded is Class Size Matters, and this has been a big issue. You want smaller class sizes, and this has been a big issue with you for the longest time.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. Explain why it's so important, at least in your view, I agree with it, to have smaller classes. What are the benefits that come from that?
So the research is absolutely rigorous and crystal clear, according to all the authorities, that smaller classes lead to tremendous benefits for all kids, but particularly kids of color, who see twice the amount of benefits, which is why it's only a handful of reforms that have been shown to narrow the achievement gap. Kids in smaller classes learn more, they get better grades, they get better test scores, they're suspended from school less often because they feel involved and engaged in the learning process. Teacher attrition goes down when you have smaller classes, which leads to a more experienced teaching force in the long run. And there are many studies that show other benefits of smaller classes in terms of a more engaged and better school climate. Kids in smaller classes in the early grades graduate from high schools at greater rates. They go to college and are more likely to graduate from college with a STEM degree. They're more likely to own their own home and have a 401k3 20 years later. So that the research is clear. The only stumbling block, of course, is that it costs money. And here in New York City, we've had a series of mayors, including Mayor Bloomberg and now Mayor de Blasio, who have promised to reduce class size and have done absolutely nothing about it. And in fact, more than 350,000 of our kids are in classes of 30 or more. And the number of kids in very large classes that size in the early grades have gone up significantly over the last few years. So we have been advocating nonstop on this issue for more than a decade. We now have actually a lawsuit in the state Supreme Court about the city's failure to reduce class size, because we believe a state law requires them to do so. And I truly believe that we will not make progress as a city educationally until this happens. Right now, our scores on the NAEPs, which are the national assessments, which are the gold standard, they're really the only tests that the results are really respected and relied upon, show that our achievement levels have not increased over the last 4 years, and in fact have dropped significantly in math. And since 2003, we've fallen behind other cities on the NAEPs. And I think one of the reasons is this chronic problem of overly large class sizes.
And one of the problems, you talk about the funding, I mean, there are all kinds of problems with the funding of public schools. But this obsession with tax cuts, especially among Republicans and conservatives, not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well, it means that money is just not there for education at the levels that they should be. And then, as you pointed out when I was talking to you a few days ago, a lot of the schools have not recovered from the Great Recession, from the impact of the funding cuts that resulted from the Great Recession. So can you talk a little bit about this double whammy of tax cuts and never having fully recovered the funding that schools had before the recession?
Right. It's really an amazing statistic, because we are now a decade past the recession, and yet most states and most schools still have smaller staff and yet much larger student populations than in 2007. So in most cases, class sizes have gone up since then, and state budgets, which were hugely cut back, have not recovered, and their support for public education has not recovered. And one of the things that I really think is most regrettable is that the Republicans, who controlled most of the state houses and the state legislatures, did cut back on taxes or did not make up the shortfall since the recession. But also the Democrats have not made this the issue that they should have over the last decade or so. And they've, to some extent, joined with some of the more conservative groups in terms of the DC think tanks, et cetera, and some of the larger foundations, including the Gates Foundation and others, which has a huge influence on public education in this country, to argue that money doesn't matter and that class size doesn't matter.
Right.
And in fact, Arne Duncan, when he was Secretary of Education, said we should take advantage of the recession by increasing class size. So as a Democrat—
This is an education secretary in a Democratic administration.
Yeah, it's shocking to me and very regrettable, and Bill Gates said the same thing. And with all their push towards increasing high-stakes testing, increasing charter schools, increasing all those things which have actually undermined our public schools, the notion that our public schools should be fairly funded and should have smaller classes, especially in large urban districts with lots of kids of color, was off the agenda. And I just find that very tragic and sad, because the Democrats should really be making this their issue. And even now, with Obama and Duncan gone, they have not centered on education to the degree that I think they should. Public education, right, which, by the way, in polls has a huge support among regular voters of both parties. Right now, with the teacher strikes across the country we're seeing in some of the most underfunded states, shows that popular support, believe it or not, is with the teachers. They're not with the state governments, and the conservative Republicans, legislatures and governors in many cases are giving in to the teacher demands, not because they believe in them, but because they know the popular opinion is on the teacher's side, not theirs.
And you've been heartened by these protests and demonstrations by the teachers. So in our last minute or so, talk about why you think this is a good thing that's occurring.
So it's very exciting. It's very exciting because the teachers are out there. It's truly a grassroots movement. It's not led by the unions. In a lot of these states, the unions have had a lot of their power taken away from them because of right-to-work laws. So it's a grassroots movement, and the teachers who are out there either striking or walking out, or however you want to phrase it, are doing it not just because they need higher salaries, which absolutely they do, which
right,
absolutely they do, and a lot of them aren't even making a living wage and have to have second jobs, which is absurd.
Right.
But they're also demonstrating for adequate funding for their schools in terms of class sizes, in terms of counselors, in terms of textbooks, in terms of falling apart school buildings, all the things that we know matter tremendously to kids. And that's also, I think, part of why there's so much popular support for the movement. So they have not taken their eyes off the prize. Of course they need a living wage. Of course they need salary increases, which many of them have not had in a decade or more. But they also understand that that must go along with fully funding our public schools and small classes, which is also one of their top priorities.
So we'll have to close it there, but there's so much more to talk about, so we'll have to have you back if you'll come back, I hope. Leonie Haimson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. The know-it-all clowns who thought it was a good idea to invade Iraq in 2003 said that only good things would come from that war. Once Saddam Hussein had been disposed of, they said, freedom would blossom in the Middle East like the flowers of spring. Well, maybe not. 15 years later, Iraq is a major league disaster zone. The most seats in a recent nationwide election went to a ticket headed by the thuggish cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, described by the Washington Post as a ferocious critic of American policies in the Middle East. Iraq is still plagued by terror attacks and other acts of murderous violence. The American-trained Iraqi army is a joke. and government corruption remains a mind-boggling staple of Iraqi life. As for the rest of the Middle East, which was supposed to benefit so mightily from that war, well, can you spell catastrophe? Syria is a world-class nightmare with the mighty U.S. looking on helplessly, pathetically. The nuclear deal forged by the U.S., its allies, and Iran has been undermined by Donald Trump. The peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians is not even on life support anymore. Nearly 4,500 American troops died in that misbegotten war in Iraq. Another 1,700 died in and around Afghanistan, which we invaded after the terror attacks of September 11, 2001. What did they die for? And what purpose was served by the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who were killed in the invasion and the long, sad years that followed? I once spent some time with an Army sergeant named Eugene Simpson, who was paralyzed from the waist down in a roadside bomb explosion in Iraq. I asked him if he and his men knew for sure who the enemy was and why they were fighting in Iraq. Sergeant Simpson, who was in a wheelchair, paused for a long moment, then said very softly, "I don't know." That would be my answer. I don't know. That was 2004, 14 years ago, and we still don't know. And the worst part? No one seems to care. That's all for now. See you next time.